Hello and welcome. The Mistress of Night holds a grudge that predates most mortal civilizations, a resentment burned so deeply into the fabric of reality that it shaped the very nature of magic itself. While most know of her eternal struggle against her twin sister Selune, fewer understand that Shar's hatred extends to another being, one who emerged from that primordial conflict like a phoenix from cosmic flames. This goddess controls something Shar can never truly possess, something that lights up the darkness, whether the night singer wills it or not. You might think power over magic would be the ultimate tool for a goddess of secrets and loss. But the truth runs far deeper and far stranger than that. The war between Shar and Mistra is not just another divine rivalry. It is the story of how magic itself became a permanent wound in the heart of oblivion. Before you can understand why Shar despises the goddess of magic, you need to understand how magic came to exist at all. In the beginning, before Toril took shape, before the mortal races drew their first breaths, there existed only two beings in the empty cosmos, Shar and Selune, darkness and light, twins born from the overgod Io's initial act of creation. They were opposites in every conceivable way, yet they shared the same birthright, the same moment of genesis. For uncounted eons, they existed in a state of strange equilibrium, their essences mingling and separating in an eternal dance that shaped nothing and created nothing permanent. But Selune grew restless with this unchanging existence. She yearned for creation, for life, for complexity and beauty. Shar, conversely, found perfection in the primordial nothingness. To her, the void was not empty, but complete, needing nothing added to mar its perfect stillness. When Selune proposed they use their combined power to create worlds, to fill the cosmos with life and light and warmth, Shar refused. The argument that followed was not a mere disagreement between siblings. It escalated into the First War, a conflict so fundamental that it rewrote the rules of existence itself. The twin goddesses clashed with powers that transcended mortal comprehension. Light and darkness collided with such force that fragments of their divine essence scattered across the void. These fragments, torn from the goddesses themselves, possessed qualities of both light and shadow. They swirled together in a violent maelstrom of opposing energies, and from this chaos, something entirely new emerged. A third consciousness formed, born from the violent union of darkness and light, neither fully one nor the other. This new being took shape and became aware, and she called herself Mistral. Mistral was the first goddess of magic, the raw embodiment of arcane power itself. She represented possibility, transformation, and the fundamental ability to reshape reality according to will and knowledge. Her very existence was an affront to everything Shar believed in. Where Shar embraced the unchanging void, Mistral embodied constant change. Where Shar sought to return everything to primordial nothingness, Mistral's nature allowed the creation and preservation, of complex patterns and structures. Most offensive of all, Mistral was literally born from Shar's own essence, a piece of the night singer herself twisted into something that opposed her most fundamental nature. Though Mistral was composed of both light and dark magic, she sided with Selune, giving the moon goddess the advantage she needed to bring warmth and life to the worlds. When Mistral established what would become known as the Weave, she created something that would torment Shar for millennia to come. The Weave was not simply a tool or a system. It was a fundamental restructuring of reality itself, a network of magical energy that permeated every corner of existence. Threads of pure magical force ran through everything, connecting all things, allowing those with knowledge and will to manipulate these connections and reshape the world around them. The Weave made magic accessible, predictable, and most importantly, permanent. You have to understand what this meant to Shar. Every spell cast through the Weave was an act of creation, an imposition of order and pattern onto the cosmos. Every wizard who learned to manipulate these threads was, in a sense, rejecting the finality that Shar represented. The Weave allowed mortals to preserve their knowledge across generations through magical writing that never faded. It allowed them to create light in darkness through simple cantrips that even apprentices could master. It gave them power over life and death, letting them heal wounds, cure diseases, and even resurrect the dead. The Weave became the foundation of civilization on Faerun and countless other worlds. Cities built their defenses around it. Nations rose to power based on their magical might. Knowledge accumulated in great libraries, preserved by magical means against the ravages of time. Everything the Weave touched became more permanent, more resistant to the entropy and loss that Shar embodied. It was as if Mistral had woven a net of light across the entire cosmos, and Shar found herself caught in it, unable to fully exercise her dominion while this network persisted. But there was something even more insulting about the Weave's nature. It was not simply opposed to Shar's philosophy. It actively incorporated darkness alongside light. Spells of shadow and spells of light both drew from the same source. Magic that created illusions of perfect darkness, and magic that summoned brilliant illumination, both relied on Mistral's Weave. Shar's own domain, her very essence, was being channeled through this cosmic structure that Mistral had created. Every shadow mage, every wielder of dark magic, was unknowingly empowering Mistral's creation, even as they thought they served the night. The goddesses clashed repeatedly throughout the ages. Mistral, and later her successor incarnations, who took the name Mistra, refined and strengthened the Weave. They established churches, recruited mortal servants, and granted divine magic to clerics who would protect the integrity of magical law. Shar, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to corrupt, damage, or destroy the Weave wherever possible. She whispered to mortals about the dangers of magic, inspired witch hunts and book burnings, and guided her followers to assault centers of magical learning. Shar's response to the weave was perhaps her most ambitious project, a feat of divine engineering that took her countless centuries to complete. Rather than accepting defeat, she studied Mistral's weave extensively, learning its structure and function. If she could not destroy the weave, if she could not unmake Mistral's great work, then she would create her own alternative. The shadow weave came into being not as a simple counter to the weave, but as a parallel system of magic based on fundamentally different principles. Where the weave connected all things, the shadow weave isolated them. Where the weave brought light and transformation, the shadow weave brought darkness and entropy. Creating the shadow weave required Shar to reshape portions of her own divine essence. She wove threads of pure shadow through the spaces between the weave's connections, creating a network that existed alongside, yet separate from Mistral's creation. This was not an easy task. The weave was already established, already integrated into the fundamental fabric of reality. Shar had to work carefully, threading her shadow magic through the gaps and voids where the weave's light did not fully reach. She had to create something that could coexist with the weave without being absorbed or destroyed by it. The shadow weave operated on different principles than its luminous counterpart. Where wizards who drew on the weave had to study and practice for years to master their craft, those who tapped into the shadow weave often found the power came more easily, more intuitively. But this ease came with a price. The shadow weave demanded something from its users, a slow erosion of hope, joy, and connection. Those who drew deeply on shadow magic found themselves gradually changing, becoming more isolated, more comfortable in darkness, more aligned with Shar's nihilistic philosophy. The shadow weave excelled at certain types of magic that the regular weave handled less efficiently. Spells of concealment, of forgetting, of loss and entropy. All these worked more powerfully when channeled through shadow rather than light. A shadow mage could erase memories more completely, hide objects more thoroughly, and drain life force more efficiently than their weave using counterparts. But there were also significant limitations. The shadow weave could not easily create lasting light or heat. It struggled with healing magic and protective wards. Most importantly, it could not operate in areas where the weave was particularly strong without great effort and concentration. Shar promoted her shadow weave among those who felt rejected by conventional magical society. She reached out to wizards who had failed to master the weave's intricacies, to sorcerers whose inborn magic felt dark and unwelcome in established magical institutions, to those who sought power without the restrictions that Mistra's church placed on certain forms of magic. Her followers established secret schools where shadow magic was taught, where students learned to draw on the dark spaces between the stars, rather than the light that Mistral had woven through creation. Though the shadow weave had existed for several millennia, it only became widely known and used around the year 1300 and 72 Dale reckoning, when Shar began actively promoting its use. Here is where the relationship between Shar and Mistra becomes truly fascinating, truly complex. Despite their eternal enmity, despite the fundamental opposition of their natures and their goals, they became inextricably linked. The shadow weave could not exist without the weave itself. Because Shar had based her creation on studying and mimicking Mistral's original work, the shadow weave defined itself in opposition to and in the spaces around the weave structure. It was parasitic in a sense, dependent on the very thing it sought to undermine. This was not a weakness Shar intended, but an unavoidable consequence of creating an alternative magical system in a cosmos already dominated by the weave. The dependency ran deeper than mere physical coexistence. The shadow weave drew its power from the same fundamental forces that powered the weave, but it channeled them differently, filtered them through shadow rather than light. When Mistra strengthened the weave, she inadvertently provided more raw material for the shadow weave to work with. When Shar expanded the shadow weave's reach, she created tensions and stresses that Mistra had to constantly monitor and adjust for. They were locked in a dance where each partner's movement affected the other, where neither could act without considering the other's response. This interdependence manifested in strange ways across Faerun. There were locations where the weave and shadow weave existed in such close proximity that they interfered with each other, creating dead magic zones where neither system functioned properly. Other places saw the two networks resonating together, creating areas of wild magic where spells behaved unpredictably, drawing on both light and shadow simultaneously. Wizards who studied both systems, rare as they were, reported sensations of vertigo and disorientation as they switched between them, as if they were shifting between two different versions of reality. The churches of Mistra and Shar found themselves in a peculiar strategic situation. Neither could fully destroy the other without risking catastrophic consequences to the magical fabric of reality itself. Mistran priests who discovered shadow weave practitioners couldn't simply execute them all, as removing shadow magic users entirely might destabilize the delicate balance between the two systems. Sharon cultists who infiltrated magical institutions couldn't burn every spellbook and kill every wizard, as weakening the weave too severely would likely collapse the shadow weave along with it. This created a cold war of sorts, a conflict fought through subtle influence and careful manipulation rather than open warfare. Mistra's followers worked to limit the shadow weave's spread, to mark shadow magic users so they could be monitored, to establish magical laws that made drawing on Shar's network more difficult and dangerous. Shar's servants countered by corrupting magical education from within, by introducing subtle flaws into weave-based spells that would make shadow magic more appealing by comparison, by spreading fear and distrust of conventional magic among common folk. The most frustrating aspect of this conflict for Shar is that she fundamentally cannot win. She cannot destroy Mistra, cannot unravel the weave, without destroying her own shadow weave in the process. This is not a matter of power or strategy. It is a hard limit imposed by the nature of reality itself, by the choices Shar made when she created her alternative magical system based on the weave structure. The shadow weave is like a vine growing on a tree. It can coexist with the tree, even damage it, even weaken it. But if the tree dies, the vine dies with it. Shar has tested this limit on multiple occasions throughout history. During the time of troubles in the year 1358 Dale Reckoning, when the gods walked Toril in mortal form, Mistra died after Helm slew her for defying Io's will. In that brief window between death and resurrection, the weave became unstable, and magic across the entire world went chaotic. Spells failed or backfired. Magical items lost their enchantments or gained dangerous new ones, and the shadow weave, too, became unstable. Shar's followers found their shadow magic just as unreliable as conventional weave spells. The lesson was clear. The two systems were bound together, and damaging one damaged both. The consequences became even more catastrophic during the spell plague. In the year 1385 Dale Reckoning, Mistra was murdered by Cyric with Shar's own assistance. A conspiracy the Night Singer hoped would allow her shadow weave to replace the weave entirely, but she had miscalculated terribly. The weave didn't just become unstable, it shattered completely. For a century, magic was fundamentally broken across Faerun. The rules that governed spellcasting changed unpredictably. Entire nations were destroyed by magical catastrophes. Portions of the world were torn away or merged with other planes. And the shadow weave, it collapsed entirely alongside the weave. Shar had to rebuild it from nothing once the weave was eventually restored. And the new shadow weave emerged weaker than before, even more dependent on the weave's stability for its own functioning. These events taught Shar a bitter lesson. She could torment Mistra, oppose her, undermine her authority, corrupt her followers, and create alternatives to her magical systems, but she could not eliminate her without eliminating a fundamental part of reality that even Shar herself relied upon. The goddess of loss and darkness, who preached the virtue of returning all things to nothingness, found herself forced to preserve the existence of her enemy to maintain her own power base. This created a unique dynamic in their relationship. They were enemies, yes, locked in eternal opposition. But they were also something like reluctant partners in maintaining the cosmos's magical infrastructure. When threats arose that endangered both the weave and the shadow weave, when entities from beyond Toril sought to impose their own magical systems or drain all magic from the world, Mistra and Shar sometimes found themselves working towards similar goals, even if they would never openly cooperate. The mortal followers of these goddesses often understood their conflicts, limits better than casual observers might expect. Mistran wizards knew that completely eliminating shadow magic was neither possible nor necessarily desirable for magical stability. Shadow weave practitioners understood that their power ultimately depended on the continued existence of the weave. They fought proxy wars, yes, but with an awareness that total victory was impossible, that this was a conflict meant to continue forever rather than be resolved. You might wonder what this means for the broader cosmos, for the nature of magic itself. The existence of two parallel magical systems, one born of light and connection, the other of shadow and isolation, both dependent on each other for survival, creates a tension that permeates all magical practice on Faerun. Every spell cast through the weave acknowledges implicitly that there is an alternative, that magic could function differently. Every shadow spell that draws on Shar's network admits through its very existence that the weave is the dominant, primary system from which shadow magic derived its structure. This tension drives magical innovation, inspires magical research, and keeps both goddesses constantly striving to prove their system superior. The war between Shar and Mistra over magic is not a war that will ever end. It cannot end. It is built into the structure of reality itself, as permanent as the opposition between light and shadow, as eternal as the conflict between creation and entropy. Shar will continue to expand and strengthen the shadow weave, to seduce mortal spellcasters into her dark embrace, to undermine the institutions that support Mistra's dominion. Mistra will continue to refine and protect the weave, to hunt down dangerous applications of shadow magic, to establish laws and restrictions that make drawing on Shar's network more difficult. And beneath it all, neither can truly defeat the other without defeating themselves. It is perhaps the most perfect expression of their relationship, a conflict frozen in eternal opposition, neither side able to win, yet neither willing to surrender. Section 2. Shar and Chauntea, Life Against the Void. While Mistra represents the transformation and possibility that Shar despises, another goddess embodies something even more fundamentally opposed to the Night Singer's vision. Chauntea, the Great Mother, the Earth Mother, the Grain Goddess, stands as a living rejection of everything Shar believes the cosmos should be. Where Shar seeks the end of all things, the return to peaceful nothingness, Chauntea represents endless continuation, the cycle that never stops, the life that refuses to cease no matter how many times darkness falls. Their conflict is older than most mortal civilizations, and it plays out every single day in the humblest of places, in farmers' fields and village gardens, in the sprouting of seeds and the ripening of grain. Chauntea's origins connect to the same primordial conflict that reshaped the cosmos, though the exact details of her emergence remain subject to scholarly debate. based on what we know of the war between Shar and Selune. When divine essence scattered across the void during their clash, some of these fragments likely fell to the newly forming worlds. These fragments would have mingled with the elemental forces shaping the young planets, sinking into stone and soil. From this fusion of divine power and elemental matter, Chantia could have emerged, becoming something that belonged neither purely to light nor darkness, but to the earth itself. Whether this interpretation is completely accurate or Chantia's origins lie elsewhere, what remains clear is that she embodies the principle of life's continuation and growth. Chantia devoted herself to a single purpose from her earliest days. She would fill the worlds with life, would cover stone with soil, would transform dead matter into living abundance. She guided the development of plants, teaching them how to draw sustenance from earth and sun. When mortal races appeared, she became their patron and their teacher. She showed them how to plant crops, how to tend animals, how to work with the land rather than simply taking from it. Under her guidance, scattered hunter-gatherers became farmers, and farmers built villages, and villages grew into civilizations fed by golden harvests. You can imagine how Shar felt watching this development. Every field of wheat was an insult. Every garden was a small act of defiance against entropy. Every harvest festival, every prayer of thanks for abundance, every child born healthy because their parents had enough food, all of it represented life continuing when Shar believed it should end. Chantia was not simply creating life. She was creating systems that sustained life indefinitely, that allowed it to persist and multiply even in the face of hardship and disaster. The philosophical opposition between Shar and Chantia runs deeper than their actions. It touches on fundamental questions about the nature of existence itself. Shar teaches that existence is suffering, that consciousness itself is a curse, that the greatest mercy is oblivion. She points to the pain inherent in life, the losses every creature must endure, the inevitable decay and death that awaits all things. Her followers find comfort in the promise that all of this will eventually end, that entropy will claim everything, and in that ending, there will be peace. Chantia offers a radically different vision. She acknowledges that life includes suffering, that winter follows harvest, that death comes to all living things. But she teaches that this is not the end of the story. The wheat that dies in autumn becomes seed for spring. The fallen tree becomes food for insects and fuel for new growth. Death is not an ending, but a transformation, a necessary part of the cycle that allows life to continue. Where Shar sees futility in this endless repetition, Chantia sees purpose and beauty. Each generation learns from the last, builds on their knowledge, creates something new from the foundation the previous generation laid. This conflict manifests most clearly in agricultural communities, in the small farming villages that dot the countryside of Faerun. These communities depend on Chantia's blessings for their survival. A good harvest means life. A failed harvest means starvation. The farmers pray to the Earth Mother, make offerings at her shrines, celebrate her festivals with genuine devotion born from real need. Their entire way of life is an affirmation of everything Chantia represents: the nurturing of life, the patient cultivation of abundance, the faith that next year's seeds will grow as this year's did. Based on Shar's opposition to growth and continuation, we can infer that her followers would see these communities as particularly offensive targets. A Sharon cultist would look at a thriving farm and see not honest labor, but willful blindness. People clinging to life and hope when they should embrace the darkness. They would see the cycle of planting and harvest as a trap that keeps people bound to existence. Generation after generation, enduring suffering when they could find peace in oblivion. The destruction of agricultural prosperity becomes, in their theology, an act of mercy. The methods Sharon agents would employ to devastate farmland align with their goddesses' portfolio of loss and darkness. Some would work through direct sabotage, poisoning wells or burning fields just before harvest. Others would employ more subtle techniques, corrupting seeds so they grow into twisted, inedible plants, or introducing blights and diseases that spread through crops. The most insidious Sharon attacks would target the farmers themselves, filling their minds with despair and hopelessness, convincing them that their labor is pointless, that the land will never yield, that they should simply give up and let everything return to wilderness. The Church of Chantia has developed countermeasures against such threats throughout history. Her priests walk the fields at planting time, blessing seeds and soil, strengthening the natural vitality that makes crops grow. They maintain watch over farming communities, alert for signs of corruption or blight. They teach farmers protective rituals, simple prayers and offerings that can ward off the worst dangers in regions where threats are known to be high. Chantian priests sometimes live permanently in farming villages, dedicating themselves to protecting the harvests that keep those communities alive. The conflict between their followers often takes on a deeply personal character. A Chantian priest sees their work as pure service, helping people survive, preventing starvation and suffering. They would view those who destroy crops or spread agricultural despair as forces of evil. The philosophical divide creates situations of terrible tragedy in rural areas. A village might have someone who secretly worships Shar, who whispers prayers to darkness while outwardly participating in harvest festivals. When drought comes or crops fail, this person works subtly to deepen the despair, to convince neighbors that the land is cursed, that they should abandon their homes and let the wilderness reclaim what was once farmland. The seasonal nature of agriculture gives this conflict a rhythmic quality. Spring is when Chantia's influence grows strongest, when life returns to the land after winter's darkness, when farmers plant seeds with hope and faith in future abundance. Summer brings growth and prayers of thanks for the green fields. Autumn is the most critical time, when the harvest comes in and the success or failure of the year's labor becomes apparent. Chantian festivals during harvest season are elaborate affairs, whole communities coming together to celebrate abundance, to give thanks for food that will sustain them through winter. Winter, ironically, is when the philosophical opposition becomes most clear. The land lies dormant, covered in snow in northern regions, the fields empty and still. Chantian theology teaches that winter is not death, but sleep, not an ending, but a necessary rest before the cycle begins again. The seeds beneath the snow are not dead, but waiting. And spring will come no matter how deep the winter darkness grows. This cyclical understanding directly opposes Shar's vision of final endings. The broader implications of this divine rivalry extend beyond simple agricultural success or failure. Chantia represents the principle that effort matters, that working to sustain and nurture life is inherently worthwhile. Her followers build futures for their children and grandchildren, plant trees they will never see fully grown, improve the land knowing the benefits will outlast them. This forward-looking optimism, this faith in continuation, stands in direct opposition to Shar's teaching that all effort is ultimately futile. The war between Shar and Chantia is ultimately a war about whether life itself is worth perpetuating. Shar says no, that existence is suffering, and the kindest act is to end it. Chantia says yes, that life despite its hardships has value and beauty, that each new generation deserves the chance to grow and thrive. Every seed that sprouts is an affirmation of Chantia's vision. Every field left fallow and forgotten could represent a small victory for entropy. The conflict plays out in countless small moments, in decisions about whether to plant or abandon, whether to nurture or let die, whether to hope for next year's harvest or surrender to the darkness. Unlike her conflict with Mistra, Shar has no dependency on Chantia. She could theoretically work to eliminate the Earth Mother without suffering direct consequences to her own power. But Chantia's influence is not centralized in magical networks or divine hierarchies. It is distributed across every farm and garden, every wild forest and meadow, every place where life grows and flourishes. To truly defeat Chantia, Shar would have to sterilize entire worlds. And even then, life has a way of returning, of finding purchase in the smallest crack, of beginning the cycle anew. Section 3. Shar versus Lothendare, dawn against eternal night. If Chantia represents life's refusal to end, then Lothendare embodies something that strikes even deeper at Shar's philosophy. The Morning Lord, as his followers call him, is the god of dawn, renewal, and new beginnings, where Shar teaches that all things should move toward their final ending. Lothendare proclaims that every ending is merely the prelude to a new beginning. Where the night singer embraces finality and the peace of oblivion, the god of dawn celebrates fresh starts, second chances, and the eternal possibility of transformation. Their conflict is written into the very structure of each day, playing out in the eternal struggle between darkness and light, night and morning. The setting sun and its inevitable return. Lathander's nature is fundamentally optimistic in a way that offends everything Shar stands for. He is not simply a god of light. There are many such deities. He specifically represents the light that returns after darkness, the promise that no matter how long the night, dawn will come again. His domain encompasses not just the physical sunrise, but the metaphorical dawning of hope, the moment when someone decides to start over, to try again, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. Every person who rises from despair, every community that rebuilds after disaster, every soul that chooses hope over surrender performs an act that affirms the Morning Lord's vision. Whether they realize it or not, the theological opposition between these two deities could not be more complete. Shar preaches that pain and loss are fundamental to existence, that the only escape is through forgetting and eventual oblivion. Her followers find comfort in darkness, in letting go of hope and ambition, in accepting that all things end and finding peace in that acceptance. Lathander teaches the opposite. He acknowledges that loss and pain exist, that darkness falls and terrible things happen. But he insists these are not the end of the story. Dawn always comes. Renewal is always possible. No matter how terrible yesterday was, today offers the chance to begin again. This message resonates powerfully with mortals, perhaps too powerfully for Shar's comfort. A person who has lost everything, who stands amid the ruins of their former life, faces a choice. They can surrender to despair, can embrace the darkness, and let go of all hope, can find the cold comfort that Shar offers in accepting that their suffering will eventually end in oblivion. Or they can turn toward the dawn, can choose to believe that they can rebuild, that tomorrow offers possibility, that they deserve a second chance. Lathander's entire theology is built around encouraging people to make the second choice. And every person who does so is a soul lost to Shar's embrace. Given the fundamental opposition of their philosophies, we can infer that conflicts between their followers would be particularly intense. Lathander's clergy tend to be more militant than many other good-aligned faiths, viewing themselves as warriors of the light who actively push back against darkness. They would see Sharan cultists not as misguided souls to be pitied, but as active threats to be eliminated. This active stance suggests their conflict would erupt into open confrontation more readily than Shar's subtle shadow wars with other deities. The daily rituals of both religions reflect their fundamental opposition. Sharan worship reaches its peak at nightfall, when darkness descends and day ends. Their ceremonies celebrate endings, embrace loss, and practice rituals of forgetting. The most sacred Sharan rite is the nightfall ritual, performed as the sun sets, where worshippers deliberately let go of painful memories, surrendering them to the darkness, seeking the peace of oblivion. They gather in windowless temples or deep caves where no hint of dawn can penetrate, creating spaces of eternal night where the sun's return cannot disturb their communion with shadow. Lathander's worship, conversely, centers on dawn services. His faithful rise before sunrise gather on hilltops or in temples with eastern-facing windows and watch together as light returns to the world. They greet the dawn with songs of renewal, with prayers of thanksgiving for another day, with rituals that celebrate new beginnings. The most important Lathanderite ceremony is the dawn greeting, where worshippers speak aloud their hopes for the new day, their intentions to improve themselves or their communities, their gratitude for the chance to start fresh. They build their temples to maximize morning light, with great windows that flood the sanctuary with the first rays of dawn. These opposing ritual schedules create a rhythm of conflict that repeats daily as Sharon cultists celebrate nightfall and the ending of another day. Lathanderite priests prepare for the dawn service that will come in a few hours. As dawn worshippers greet the morning with joy and hope, Sharon followers retreat to their dark sanctuaries, shutting out the light, seeking the comfort of shadow. The cycle never stops, and neither side can claim permanent victory. Night always falls, but dawn always comes. The symbolic warfare between these faiths would likely extend into architecture and urban planning in regions where either holds significant influence. In cities where Lathander's church is strong, urban development would prioritize eastern exposure. Streets would be laid out to catch the morning sun. Public squares would feature monuments designed to catch the first light of day. The entire city becomes a temple to renewal, a space designed to remind people daily that darkness ends and light returns. Based on Sharon methodology in other conflicts, their cultists in such cities would work to subvert this symbolism. They would purchase properties and renovate them to block eastern light. They would plant tall trees or construct buildings specifically positioned to cast long shadows over dawn monuments. They would lobby for zoning changes that would allow the construction of windowless buildings, arguing for practicality or privacy, while secretly working to create more spaces where darkness can persist undisturbed. The conflict would play out in city council meetings and architectural review boards, rarely recognized for what it truly is: a divine war fought through municipal regulations. The philosophical divide between Shar and Lathander manifests most clearly in their approach to history and memory. Shar teaches that the past is a burden, that memories cause pain, that the kindest thing one can do is forget. Her followers practice deliberate amnesia, letting go of grudges and griefs, surrendering their histories to darkness. They see no value in dwelling on what was, believing that clinging to the past prevents the acceptance that leads to peace. In extreme cases, Sharon rituals can actually erase memories, removing traumatic experiences from a person's mind entirely, leaving them free from that particular pain. Lathander takes the opposite view. He teaches that the past, even painful past, has value because it teaches lessons that inform the future. Memory is not a burden, but a foundation. You remember your mistakes so you can avoid repeating them. You remember your losses so you appreciate what you still have. You remember the darkness so you can recognize and celebrate the dawn. This suggests Lathinderite clergy would encourage their followers to acknowledge pain and loss, to process grief rather than suppress it, to learn from hardship, and use those lessons to build something better. This creates a fundamental difference in how the two faiths would approach people who are suffering. Someone who has experienced terrible trauma might seek help from either church. The Sharon priest would offer rituals of forgetting, ways to erase the painful memory, to let darkness swallow the hurt and leave the person at peace, empty perhaps, but free from anguish. The Lathinderite priest would offer counseling and community support, helping the person process their pain, find meaning in their survival, and use their experience as a foundation for growth and renewal. Both approaches have their adherents, and both can be effective in their way. The Sharon method offers immediate relief from unbearable pain, though at the cost of losing part of oneself. The Lathinderite approach requires more time and effort, demanding that the sufferer work through their pain rather than escape it. But it allows them to remain whole, to integrate their experience rather than erase it. The two churches would compete for traumatized souls, each convinced their method is more compassionate, each viewing the other's approach as harmful. The rivalry between Shar and Lathinder would intensify during certain times of year. The summer solstice, when days are longest and darkness has the least dominion, represents the height of solar power. Lathinder's followers would hold elaborate festivals, celebrations of light's triumph over darkness. Based on Sharon behavior in other contexts, their cultists would likely target these festivals for disruption, seeing them as particularly offensive displays of the false hope they oppose. Conversely, the winter solstice, when nights are longest and dawn comes latest, would empower Sharon rituals. The night singers faithful celebrate the longest night with ceremonies that embrace the extended darkness. The conflict between these deities extends into questions of justice and redemption. When terrible wrongs occur, when innocent people suffer through no fault of their own, how should the survivors respond? Sharon philosophy suggests that seeking justice is futile, that dwelling on wrongs only perpetuates suffering, that the best response is to forget the injury and move forward into the comforting void. Lathinder teaches that wrongs should be addressed, that justice matters, but that the goal is not vengeance, but restoration, creating conditions where similar wrongs become less likely in the future. This difference would manifest in the legal systems of regions dominated by each faith. Areas under strong Sharon influence would tend toward harsh, final punishments. Crimes would be punished severely, but once the sentence is served, the matter would be considered ended and forgotten. Records might even be destroyed, ensuring no one remembers what happened. The philosophy is that dwelling on past wrongs, maintaining grudges and grievances, only causes more pain. Better to punish swiftly and then erase all memory of the offense. Latender-influenced legal systems would emphasize rehabilitation and restoration. They would maintain detailed records of crimes and punishments, believing that history teaches important lessons. But they would also believe in redemption, in the possibility that wrongdoers can change, can start fresh, can become better versions of themselves. Punishments would likely include community service, restitution to victims, and programs designed to address the root causes of criminal behavior. The philosophy is that dawn comes for everyone, that no one is beyond the possibility of renewal. One historical event stands as a cautionary tale about Lathender's approach to renewal taken to extremes. The Dawn Cataclysm, which occurred in ancient times, resulted from Lathender's attempt to restructure the divine hierarchy itself, to create a new beginning even among the gods. The endeavor went catastrophically wrong, resulting in the destruction of multiple deities and widespread devastation. This could imply that even renewal, taken to extremes without proper caution, can become destructive. The event serves as a reminder that both endings and beginnings carry risks when pursued without wisdom. The war between Shar and Lathander ultimately comes down to a question about the nature of hope. Shar views hope as a cruel joke, a false promise that keeps people trapped in cycles of suffering. She sees herself as merciful, offering release from hope's burden, allowing people to stop struggling and accept the inevitable. Lathander views hope as essential to existence, the quality that makes life worth living despite its hardships. He sees Shar's offer of oblivion as the ultimate cruelty, robbing people of the chance to experience joy, growth, and transformation. Every sunrise is a small defeat for Shar, a reminder that her dominion is never absolute, that light returns no matter how deep the darkness. Every sunset is a reminder that day ends, that night claims the world repeatedly. The cycle continues eternally, neither deity able to claim final victory. Their conflict built into the fundamental structure of time itself, as inevitable and unending as the alternation between night and day. Section 4. Shar and the Gods of Knowledge. Knowledge accumulates across generations, building upon itself, creating structures of understanding that grow more complex with each passing century. This accumulation stands as one of the greatest threats to Shar's vision of eventual oblivion. And nowhere is this threat more concentrated than in the domains of deities, who specifically champion the preservation, recording, and sharing of knowledge. Chief among these is Agma the Binder, god of knowledge itself, patron of scholars and libraries, the divine force that ensures what one generation learns is not lost to the next. His very existence represents everything Shar opposes, and their conflict has shaped the intellectual landscape of Faerun for millennia. Agma's philosophy centers on a simple but powerful premise. Knowledge is sacred. Every piece of information, every discovered truth, every recorded observation adds to the collective understanding of mortal races. This accumulated wisdom allows civilizations to progress, to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, to build upon previous achievements rather than starting from nothing each generation. Libraries are temples to this principle, vast repositories where knowledge is preserved against time's erosion, where any seeker can find the accumulated wisdom of ages past. Agma teaches that this preservation is not just useful, but morally necessary, that allowing knowledge to be lost is a tragedy that impoverishes everyone. Shar views this entire enterprise with profound disgust. To her, accumulated knowledge is accumulated suffering. Every book in a library contains the recorded pain of its creation. The medical text that describes diseases also records the suffering of those who died from them. The history that chronicles great wars preserves the memory of countless deaths. The philosophical treatise that grapples with existence's nature was born from someone's struggle with despair and meaninglessness. Knowledge does not simply exist in abstract purity. From this perspective, it carries with it the weight of all the pain that went into its discovery and recording. More fundamentally, the preservation of knowledge creates continuity across time. A scholar in the present can read the words of someone who lived 1,000 years ago, can learn from their insights, can build upon their work. This connection across generations is exactly what Shar seeks to sever. She teaches that each ending should be complete, that when something passes, it should pass entirely, leaving no trace. The dead should be forgotten, not immortalized in books. Past civilizations should vanish completely, not persist through their recorded histories. Knowledge preservation is, in Shar's view, a form of keeping the dead alive through their words and ideas when they should be allowed to rest in oblivion. The Church of Agma maintains some of the greatest libraries on Faerun. Candlekeep, perhaps the most famous, houses tens of thousands of texts covering every imaginable subject. Entry requires a gift of a book the library does not already possess, ensuring the collection constantly grows. Scholars from across the world travel to Candlekeep to conduct research, to copy texts, to add their own discoveries to the collection. The library's monks dedicate their entire lives to preserving and cataloging knowledge, treating each book as a sacred trust, a piece of accumulated wisdom that must be protected and made accessible to future generations. Based on Shar's opposition to knowledge preservation, we can infer that Sharon cultists would view such libraries as priority targets. The methods would vary depending on the circumstances. Some would work slowly, taking positions as scribes or librarians, then deliberately introducing errors into copied texts, misfilling important works so they cannot be found, allowing valuable books to deteriorate through neglect. Other times, they might act with sudden violence, setting fires meant to consume entire collections, assassinating key scholars whose expertise cannot be easily replaced, stealing unique texts that exist in no other copies. But Agma's church is not the only keeper of knowledge that Shar opposes. Dener, god of writing and language, patron of scribes and artists, represents another facet of knowledge preservation that the Night Singer would find offensive. Where Agma concerns himself with knowledge in the abstract, Dener focuses on the specific act of recording, of translating thought and observation into written form. Every scribe who carefully copies a text, every artist who sketches what they observe, every writer who records events as they unfold, all these perform acts that preserve information against the forgetting that Shar advocates. Dener's domain encompasses not just the content of writing, but the form. He is patron to calligraphers who make texts beautiful as well as readable, to illuminators who decorate manuscripts with elaborate art, to bookbinders who preserve written works in protective covers. His followers believe that the act of writing itself is sacred, that transforming ephemeral thought into permanent record is one of the highest callings a mortal can pursue. They maintain scriptoriums, where teams of scribes work to copy important texts, ensuring that multiple copies exist so that the loss of one does not mean the loss of the knowledge it contains. This multiplication of texts would be particularly offensive to Sharan philosophy. A unique manuscript can be destroyed, its knowledge lost forever. But when dozens or hundreds of copies exist, spread across the world, destroying the knowledge becomes nearly impossible. The text's survival is no longer dependent on any single copy or any single library. The knowledge has achieved a kind of immortality through replication, persisting despite Shar's desire for all things to end and be forgotten. Based on this theological opposition, Sharan activities targeting knowledge would likely focus on preventing replication. They would target scriptoriums during the copying of particularly important works, seeking to destroy both the original and all copies before the multiplication is complete. They would hunt down skilled scribes, particularly those who possess rare linguistic knowledge or specialized expertise. In regions where Sharan influence is strong, they might work to restrict literacy itself, keeping populations ignorant so that written knowledge becomes inaccessible to most people, so that libraries and their contents become meaningless marks on pages that no one can read. The philosophical conflict between Shar and the gods of knowledge extends beyond mere preservation into questions about the nature and purpose of wisdom itself. Agma and Dener teach that knowledge empowers people, gives them tools to improve their lives and their world. The farmer who can read learns better agricultural techniques. The physician who studies medical texts can treat more diseases. The ruler who understands history can avoid repeating past mistakes. Knowledge is liberation, a light that drives back the darkness of ignorance. Shar counters with a darker wisdom. She argues that knowledge is burden, that ignorance is peace. The farmer who knows only how to work the land, and nothing of the great wars and disasters recorded in history books lives a simpler, less troubled life. The person who never learns of all the ways life can go wrong, all the diseases that can strike, all the tragedies that can occur, sleeps more peacefully than the scholar who has read extensively about human suffering. Wisdom in Shar's teaching is awareness of pain, and the truly merciful act is to prevent people from acquiring that awareness. This philosophy would have practical implications for how Sharon cultists approach education. In communities where they hold influence, they would work to limit schooling, to keep curricula basic and practical, to discourage intellectual curiosity. They would promote the idea that too much learning is dangerous, that questioning traditional ways leads to trouble, that people should accept what they are told rather than seeking to verify or expand their knowledge. The goal would be to create populations that are deliberately incurious, that accept ignorance as natural and proper, that see no value in the accumulated wisdom that Agma and Dener work to preserve. The irony of Shar's position regarding knowledge creates one of the most fascinating contradictions in her theology. While she works to destroy accumulated knowledge and prevent its preservation, she is herself the goddess of secrets. Her domain includes hidden knowledge, information deliberately concealed, truths known only to select initiates. Sharon cults maintain their own secret lore, teachings passed from master to student, rituals recorded in hidden texts that outsiders are forbidden to see. The goddess who opposes knowledge preservation carefully preserves her own knowledge. This apparent contradiction is actually central to Sharon theology. The knowledge that Shar preserves is knowledge of endings, of loss, of oblivion. It is not knowledge that empowers or enlightens in the way Agma's teachings do. It is dark wisdom, an understanding of how to forget, how to let go, how to embrace nothingness. Sharon's secret texts do not teach how to build or create or improve. They teach how to destroy, how to corrupt, how to undermine. This could be seen as knowledge meant to be used and then discarded, wisdom in service of eventual ignorance. The destruction of libraries carries deep symbolic weight in the conflict between Shar and the gods of knowledge. When a library burns, whether through Sharon action or other causes, more than property is destroyed. A community that loses its library loses part of its identity. Local histories vanish. Records of ancestors disappear. The accumulated knowledge that defined the community's character and informed its decisions simply ceases to exist. This is exactly what Shar intends. She seeks not just the loss of specific information, but the severing of communities from their pasts, the creation of populations adrift in an eternal present with no connection to what came before. Agma's followers have developed sophisticated defenses against these threats over the centuries. Major libraries now employ powerful magical protections, wards against fire, and other destructive forces. They train guards specifically to defend against infiltration and sabotage. Most importantly, they maintain networks of smaller libraries and scriptoriums, ensuring that important texts exist in multiple locations so that no single attack can eliminate them entirely. This distributed preservation strategy frustrates attempts to erase specific pieces of knowledge, but it also requires constant vigilance and significant resources. The conflict manifests in individual lives as well as institutional struggles. Consider a scholar who has devoted decades to researching a specific historical period, who has uncovered information that no one else possesses. Based on Sharon methodology, a cultist might approach this scholar not with violence, but with seduction. They would whisper about the burden of knowledge, about how much simpler life would be if the scholar could forget what they have learned, could surrender all those years of accumulated wisdom, and find peace in ignorance. Some scholars, worn down by the isolation and difficulty of their work, might find this offer tempting. The war between Shar and the gods of knowledge is ultimately a war about whether the past should inform the future. Agma and Denair argue that history teaches essential lessons, that accumulated wisdom allows progress, that preserving knowledge honors those who came before while serving those who come after. Shar counters that the past is dead and should remain so, that each generation should face the world fresh and unencumbered, that the kindest thing we can do for future generations is allow them to forget what we learned through suffering. Neither side can claim total victory in this conflict. Libraries burn, but new ones are built. Scholars are killed, but their students carry on their work. Texts are destroyed, but copies survive in distant locations. Knowledge is lost, but new knowledge is discovered. The cycle continues, with neither ignorance nor wisdom able to claim permanent dominion. Shar works tirelessly to create forgetting, to ensure that what is learned will eventually be lost. The gods of knowledge work with equal dedication to preserve, to record, to ensure that discoveries made by one generation benefit all who come after. The battle for the future of accumulated wisdom rages on, fought in libraries and schools, in scriptoriums and secret temples, in the mind of every person who must choose whether to seek knowledge or embrace ignorance. Section 5. Unlikely alliances, gods who sometimes serve Shar's purposes. Shar's conflicts with Mistra, Chauntea, Lothandair, and the gods of knowledge might suggest she stands completely alone in the divine hierarchy, opposed by all and allied to none. The reality is more complex and more disturbing. While the Night Singer has no true friends among the pantheon, she sometimes finds herself working alongside other deities whose goals, at least temporarily, align with her own vision of loss and oblivion. These are not partnerships in any meaningful sense. They are convergences of interest, moments when the agendas of different dark powers happen to point in the same direction. Understanding these temporary alliances reveals much about Shar's nature and about the broader dynamics of divine politics in Faerun. The gods of vengeance occupy a particularly complicated relationship with Shar's domain. Deities like Hor, who governs retribution and poetic justice, sometimes find their portfolios overlapping with Shar's emphasis on endings and finality. When someone seeks vengeance for a terrible wrong, they are often seeking to create loss and suffering equal to what they experienced. They want the perpetrator to feel the same pain, to lose what they value, to understand through direct experience the agony they inflicted. This desire for symmetrical suffering can lead wounded souls into Shar's embrace. A person consumed by the need for revenge often begins by seeking justice through proper channels. They appeal to authorities, demand legal redress, want their grievance acknowledged and addressed. But when those systems fail, when the guilty go unpunished, or the punishment seems inadequate, when justice appears impossible through conventional means, desperation sets in. Based on what we know of Sharon recruitment tactics, this is when cultists would approach, offering a different path. They would whisper that true balance comes not through justice, but through loss, not through punishment, but through taking from the guilty everything they value, not through legal proceedings, but through the direct infliction of suffering. Hor's theology technically opposes this approach. He teaches that vengeance should be proportional, that the response should fit the original crime, that revenge is a form of balance rather than simple cruelty. But the line between measured retribution and Sharon destruction can blur, especially for someone whose pain is so great that no punishment seems adequate. A widow whose husband was murdered might start by wanting the killer brought to justice. When that fails, she might want the killer to suffer as her husband suffered. But if even that proves impossible, if the killer escapes or dies before facing consequences, the widow's desire for vengeance can transform into something darker. If she cannot make the killer suffer, perhaps she can make everyone suffer. If balance is impossible, perhaps oblivion is preferable. This is where vengeance gods and Shar's philosophy intersect. The widow who begins seeking justice can end as a Sharon cultist working to spread the same loss she experienced to the world at large. Her original righteous anger transforms into nihilistic rage. Her specific desire for retribution broadens into a general embrace of endings and loss. Shar does not create this transformation through force. She simply provides a philosophical framework that makes the transition feel natural, even inevitable. The practical result is that temples of vengeance gods could serve as recruiting grounds for Sharon cults. A person who enters seeking help with legitimate grievances might leave as a servant of darkness, convinced that the night singer offers the only true path to the balance they seek. The vengeance gods themselves would not approve of this recruitment, but preventing it requires constant vigilance. Their clergy must carefully screen petitioners, distinguish between those seeking proportional justice and those spiraling into nihilistic despair, intervene before righteous anger becomes destructive madness. Mask, god of thieves and shadows, maintains a more deliberate, though still limited cooperation with Shar. Both deities value secrecy. Both work through hidden followers. Both prefer their servants to operate from darkness rather than openly declaring themselves. A thief who robs a wealthy merchant serves Mask's interests by redistributing wealth and demonstrating the limits of material security. The same theft can serve Sharon purposes by creating loss, by teaching the merchant that nothing is permanent, that everything can be taken away. The philosophical justifications differ, but the practical actions align. Mask's relationship with Shar is ancient and complicated by the fact that he was once her servant, created from a portion of her divine essence during the time of troubles to recover the tablets of fate. He gained independence and divinity through that mission, but the connection to his creator persists. He is not her subordinate anymore, but neither is he entirely free of her influence. They share certain domains, overlap in certain areas, and their followers sometimes cooperate when their interests align. A thief guild aligned with Mask might shelter Sharon cultists who need to operate covertly in a city. The thieves do not necessarily share Sharon theology, but they understand the value of allies who can keep secrets, who work outside the law, who have skills in infiltration and sabotage. In return, Sharon agents might provide intelligence to the thieves, information gathered through their own networks, knowledge that allows profitable heists or helps avoid law enforcement. The cooperation is purely practical, each side using the other for their own purposes, but it can be quite effective. However, this alliance has strict limits. Mask values secrets because they have worth, because knowing what others do not provides advantage. Shar values secrets because hidden things are closer to non-existence, because what is forgotten might as well never have been. When a thief aligned with Mask steals a valuable gem, they want to sell it or keep it to derive value from their crime. When a Sharon cultist steals the same gem, they might destroy it, eliminating something beautiful and valuable from the world. These fundamentally different motivations create friction that prevents true partnership. The relationship becomes more strained when Sharon activities threaten the underworld stability that Mask's followers depend on. Thieves need functioning cities to rob, merchants with goods to steal, systems of law and order to evade. If Sharon cultists successfully spread enough despair and nihilism to collapse social order entirely, there is nothing left to steal and nowhere to fence stolen goods. Total oblivion serves no one's interests except Shar's. Smart thief guilds would recognize this and carefully limit their cooperation with Sharon agents, helping them when convenient, sabotaging them if their activities threaten broader stability. Among the evil deities, Shar finds occasional common cause with gods of death and decay, though even these alignments are superficial. The current death god, Kelimver, believes death should be natural and peaceful, a transition rather than an ending, with the dead moving on to afterlives appropriate to their deeds and alignments. This continuity of existence after death opposes everything Shar represents. Jurgal, ancient and weary, maintains the bureaucracy of death with meticulous record-keeping, documenting every soul's passing and destination. This preservation of death records is exactly the kind of remembering that Shar seeks to prevent. Among demon lords and archdevils, Shar finds even more limited cooperation. These entities pursue power, dominion, and the corruption of mortal souls. Shar ultimately wants all souls to cease existing, to return to the void. A demon lord who corrupts a soul wants to torture it eternally. Shar would prefer that soul simply stop being. The goals are incompatible in the long term, though short-term cooperation might be possible when both benefit from undermining the forces of good or destabilizing material plane societies. The limits of these alliances reveal a fundamental truth about Shar's nature. She cannot truly cooperate with anyone because her ultimate goal is the ending of everything, including her potential allies. Every other evil deity, no matter how dark their portfolio or cruel their methods, wants something to exist. They want to rule something, to dominate someone, to achieve some end that requires a cosmos to achieve it in. Shar alone seeks true nothingness, and that makes her fundamentally incompatible with long-term partnership. This solitary nature manifests in how Sharon cults operate compared to other evil organizations. Followers of demon lords often gather in large groups, pooling their strength to summon their patron or conduct elaborate rituals. Devil cultists create hierarchies that mirror the rigid structures of the 9 hells. Even chaotic evil worshippers of other dark gods form congregations that provide community and support. Sharon cultists, conversely, often work alone or in very small cells, deliberately isolated from each other, each pursuing their own interpretation of the Night Singer's will. This isolation is both strategic and theological. Strategically, isolated cells are harder to infiltrate and destroy. If authorities capture one Sharon agent, that person can only betray a few others at most. The broader network remains intact. Theologically, isolation reflects Sharon philosophy. Connection breeds attachment, and attachment breeds suffering. The ideal Sharon cultist should be so detached from others that betrayal and loss touch them lightly, so committed to oblivion that their own death or imprisonment barely matters. Shar's relationship with her own followers reflects this theme of ultimate solitude. She grants them power and occasionally guidance, but she does not love them or value them as individuals. They are tools for spreading loss and darkness, useful while they function, disposable when they break. A cleric of Shar who loses faith or fails in their mission can expect no divine intervention to save them. No second chances, no redemption arc. They will be forgotten, and their forgetting will itself serve Shar's purposes by teaching other followers that even devoted service leads ultimately to oblivion. This makes serving Shar a uniquely bleak calling, even among evil deities. A priest of a demon lord can at least imagine ascending to become a demon themselves, gaining immortality and power in the abyss. A warlock bound to an archdevil might negotiate favorable terms in the afterlife, trading service for position in the infernal hierarchy. A Sharon cultist works toward the eventual ending of everything, including themselves, with no promise of reward beyond the peace of non-existence. Those who genuinely embrace this philosophy are rare and disturbing individuals who have concluded that existence itself is not worth preserving. The question of why anyone would serve such a deity reveals much about mortal psychology and the nature of despair. Most Sharon cultists do not start as nihilistic philosophers who carefully reason their way to embracing oblivion. They start as people who suffered terrible losses, who experienced pain so profound that death seemed preferable to continuation. Shar offers them a framework that makes their suffering meaningful, that transforms their personal despair into cosmic purpose. She tells them their pain was not random misfortune, but evidence of existence's fundamental flaw. She promises that by spreading loss and darkness, they serve a higher purpose that will ultimately free all beings from suffering. This message can be powerfully seductive to someone in the depths of grief or trauma. It transforms victimhood into agency, helplessness into purpose. The widow who could not save her husband can at least work toward a world where no one else must endure such loss, because existence itself will end. The soldier traumatized by war's horrors can channel their anguish into spreading the darkness that will eventually swallow all conflict. The philosophy is toxic and destructive, but it offers structure and meaning to people whose lives have been shattered by loss. The ultimate irony of Shar's alliances and her relationship with her followers is that she spreads connection while preaching isolation, creates meaning while teaching nihilism, builds structures while promising their destruction. Every cult she inspires is a community, however dark and twisted. Every mission she assigns her followers gives them purpose. Every alliance she forms, however temporary, represents engagement with the world rather than withdrawal into void. She cannot achieve her goals without these contradictions, but neither can she fully embrace them without undermining her own philosophy. This fundamental contradiction may be why Shar can never truly win. To end all things, she must work through agents who exist. To spread oblivion, she must inspire action and purpose. To create the final darkness, she must operate in the light just enough to affect the world. She is trapped by the same paradox that afflicts all her temporary allies. The work of destruction requires builders. The pursuit of nothingness requires something. The goddess of emptiness must be full of purpose and plans. In seeking to end all things, she perpetually proves that things persist, that existence continues, that even the night singer herself cannot escape the cosmos she wishes to unmake. And so the dance continues across the ages. Shar wages her wars against creation, life, renewal, and knowledge. She forms temporary alliances with other dark powers when their interests align. She recruits mortal followers to serve as instruments of loss and darkness. But she remains fundamentally alone, separated from genuine partnership by her ultimate goal of universal oblivion. Other gods fight for dominion, for worship, for the spread of their philosophies. Shar fights for the end of all fighting, the cessation of all struggle, the return of everything to the perfect void from which it emerged, until that final darkness comes. If it ever does, she will continue her work in eternal solitude. The night singer, whose only true companion is the shadow she casts across creation. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Shar's divine conflicts and the dark web of temporary alliances she navigates, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Lore D&D for more explorations of Forgotten Realms lore. Your support helps us continue bringing you these comprehensive looks at the gods, monsters, and mysteries that make Dungeons and Dragons such a rich and fascinating world. Until next time, may your own path never lead into such profound darkness.